Hi, I'm Charlene Tait, Director of Development, and I'm joined by Mike McCreadie from Studio 3. And Mike's here to talk to us about Studio 3 and a specific project that we're working on together at the moment, the ATLASS work throughout Scottish Autism. Welcome to Scottish Autism, Mike. Would you start by telling us a wee bit about Studio 3?
Studio 3 started quite a few years ago. It started originally as a training company from a group of guys who were studying psychology, and at the time were working in care homes, and were quite appalled by what they observed and the way that people were managed and some of the practices. And it evolved as to a company which was a training company originally, looking at how to reduce restrictive practices for people with autism, for people with intellectual disabilities, for people with dementia. So it was very much about giving people lives back who might have been in long-term institutional care. And then it evolved to have a separate company, the company that I sit in, which is a clinical company, where we complement the work of the training company and look at least restrictive practice and something in particular called the low arousal approach, which is evidenced within the literature and is even adopted by a number of different frameworks and has grown in popularity, mainly within the last 10-15 years. And looking at the interaction between staff and families and the person with autism. And a lot of our work is working with organisations like yourself, who've got very much spirit about freeing people up, giving them the life that they want, and those are part of our core values in terms of training staff and providing clinical support and clinical input.
And I think that's the key thing for two organisations. We're a good fit. We've got the same kind of value base. So, a bunch of guys studying psychology. Tell us a wee bit about yourself.
Well, about me. Yeah. I joined the company a bit later. I used to work for the National Autistic Society, but the NAS had been using Studio 3 for some time. Okay. And myself and the director, the chief exec of Studio 3, Andy McDonald, we'd kind of known of each other for a while, but never had an opportunity to meet. And then in one Irish bar at a South African conference, we bumped into each other. And from there we started a conversation because we were both coming at this from different angles, but with we discovered we've got a core beliefs. And that being not really changing people with autism per se, but changing the things which are around them, changing about how we interpret their behaviour. And I know that's core, certainly to an organisation like Scottish Autism. And looking at the supports around the person, looking about the family, looking about everything else, and looking at the stress within the person and how life stresses that individual. And that conversation kind of continued, and eventually I left the NES to come and work full time as consultant clinical director for Studio 3, and we work with organisations who we agree that there's a commonality with. So we don't just work with anyone. There has to be a dovetailing of common themes in Scottish Autism, and there's a range of organisations, not just in the UK, but throughout Europe, and we work in South Africa, and we're about to start work in Australia. And I think as of today, my colleague Andy's flying off to Canada, and he's been commuting back and forward to there for the last 3 months. So it's about organisations, so it doesn't have to be within a country, but where there is a spirit and where there's an ethos which is complementary to how we view things.
Which is very refreshing, because the culture of an organisation really sets the tone for everything. And you mentioned least restrictive practice. Can you say a wee bit about what you actually mean about that, how you define that?
Well, least restrictive practice is looking at really kind of releasing the restrictions in the person's life, and it's about control. And very often we can feel that a person has autism, has a disability, and we take control from them. And very much in doing that, we further not only disable the person, but we restrict their opportunities for learning and development of skills. People with autism, with disability, can put themselves in vulnerable situations, so it's also being aware of that, and sometimes they might need the more restrictions just to keep them safe, but it's about moving that back and forward relative to the needs which ebb and flow in the person's life. And many organisations we found would be very restrictive and never lift those barriers at all from a person, even though the person needs to move and needs to grow. Yeah. And Emerson, who's very well cited within the literature on challenging behaviour, in a relatively recent study for people with very challenging behaviour, found that you could reduce challenging behaviour by 50% just by giving the person more control in their life. And that's something that very much resonates within a kind of Studio 3 ethos. It's about getting people into the community, allowing them to meet the goals which are meaningful for them, but also doing it in a way that keeps them safe and doesn't have too many restrictions, and helping build confidence in staff teams and in families, and we find that's a very, very important facet of our work, is building confidence for people to almost go, okay, I can let go. As I say, Annie McDonald's even worked on measures for controllability measures within staff, so that even as staff teams we can reflect on our own values in terms of control, and that's quite profound.
And that's really interesting, because there's a real temptation to focus on the person and locate the problem within the person, but what you're really doing is looking at the interaction, the dynamics between the person, the staff member, the family member, the significant others in that person's life, which is a different kind of approach.
And it's almost going back to Bronfenbrenner's systems, ecological systems of human development, and we say, okay, we've got the person in the centre, whether the child or whether the adult, but it's all of these things around that person, and we would argue that for too long, and I think there is a sea change now, that for too long it's been about trying to change the child or trying to change this adult with autism. And given all the amount of money that's been poured in, the change has been very, very small. We're not that
pointless.
Pointless, utterly pointless. And then really, we're not that much further forward than when Asperger and Kanner had first described autism. But then it's that question, why do we need to change this person anyway? We need to keep the person safe. We need to give them the goals in life they want, but maybe it's about us changing us and changing the things around the person, and that's why we work with organisations who embrace that kind of way, but sometimes that's not for every organisation.
They're not ready maybe for that.
We would argue that they wouldn't be ready for that, and that's maybe about growth and change within them. And we're very interested in those organisational cultures.
The other term you used was low arousal, and that's knocked about a lot, isn't it? And I was quite interested when we were speaking earlier about Andy's kind of ownership of that. That was an interesting one. But tell me what you mean by that, because I do think it appears in lots of different literature and in lots of other areas. And
it does get misrepresented because people often think, well, low arousal is allowing anybody to do what they like. And we often are clear, that's not what it is. It's a term which Andy coined in the research literature, and which has been used then throughout and by other organisations, sometimes misinterpreted. But it is very much back to the notion of being aware of ourselves with that person. If that person is so stressed and distressed, we can't make demands of them, and we should have to alter our demands of the person. And what we also need to look at the distress in ourselves. So low arousal is looking at the arousal in the individual and the arousal in ourselves, and we've extended that into our work on ATLASS, and looking at autism in a stress model. And there's a growing amount of interest in this, because whilst autism is heterogeneous, which means, as you know, very different from individual to individual, to famously quote Rita Jordan, if you've met one person with autism, you've met one person with autism. But stress is a universal. It's a universal for the person with autism, and it's a universal in us.
Absolutely.
So it's looking at the arousal on a physiological level in the person, on a psychological level in the person, but also the arousal within the person supporting that.
Absolutely.
Whether it's a mum, whether it's a dad,
yeah.
whether it's a brother, a sister, whether it's
Yeah.
a person employed, whether it's an organisation, and looking at how we can alter arousal levels and how the person's arousal level will affect their communication, their understanding, their cognition.
Yeah.
And now more profound level about how our arousal affects our appraisal of that person, affects our understanding and their meaning of their behaviour.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it's not simply just letting a person do whatever they want.
Switch the lights off, draw the curtains.
Draw the curtains. It's far more radical than that, and it's almost like a colleague of mine in Denmark fairly recently who again have started yet another ATLASS programme said to me, this is like a paradigm shift. Because you're not trying to change the person per se, you're trying to very much look at the relationship between the arousal in them and the arousal in the people supporting them.
Yeah, which is fascinating and takes us on to the work that you're doing with our staff, which is, I know they're so excited and enthusiastic about it.
We had a great time.
So the ATLASS project, tell us about ATLASS.
So ATLASS kind of evolved from low arousal. It was the next step, and this was a conversation that Andy and I had been having over the years, and then I eventually left to work for Studio 3 to develop it. And so we'd had a conceptual notion, but we then wanted to spend some time in developing this into something that's really meaningful. How does this make a difference for people on the ground and in families and in their lives? And we were also conscious that the literature has been dominated by very psychiatric behavioural terms, and we were having conversations with other colleagues of ours around the world, like Peter Vermeulen, about getting back to the developmental understanding. Yeah. And we seem to have spent the last 20 years ignoring the fact of the one thing we know what autism is, which is a developmental condition. Yeah. And we wanted to blend that together with an understanding of stress and stress relationships in the person with autism and the people supporting that person, whether it's a family member or a member of staff in an organisation such as Scottish Autism. So we developed a course. It's a 5-day induction course, and the first couple of days are going right back to understanding.
Make no assumptions.
Make no assumptions, and level the playing field and understand really what we mean by a developmental, what is typical development, but what then is atypical development. Because we can't talk about autism until you understand, well, what's typical development?
It's so important and so obvious, isn't it? It's really,
And colleagues have said that to us, how have we been missing this for so long? It's been staring us, but then sometimes the most important things have always been staring us in the face. Yeah. And really to give a recognition to what Lorna Wing has been calling on for a long time, that as a group of professionals we pay more attention to sensory perceptual differences in people with autism. Yeah. Which are hard to measure, but it's even just acknowledging our understanding of that, and that's built into the model as well, and that can fry people's brains sometimes. Yeah. Right? And then a focus on stress within the person with autism, and the stress and coping within the person supporting them. Because if you talk about stress, you've got to talk about coping. Yeah. And we all cope. It might not be healthy coping in this situation, but helping people to shift their coping styles. Okay. We blend that together. There's a 5-day induction, and then there's a series of follow-up days. And at the end of the course, we require 2 things from our participants. One is very important to us, which is a reflective log, because we're very interested in process. We're very interested in what's happened to the participants as they've come through this experience. And as rightly there should be, there's a lot of emphasis on outcomes, but we're particularly interested in what happens to people. Yeah. And then also what we call a stress reduction plan they have a focus person. We invite them when they come on the course to think of either an adult or a child that they're involved in their care or their education or whom they love, who's their own son or daughter. And we don't want a behaviour support plan. We've moved away from behaviour supports. We're interested in stress reduction plans. So to think holistically about how, as a living document, they would develop a stress reduction plan for this person.
Yeah.
And that should take cognizance of the person, but everything around that person.
Yeah.
The staff, the family,
Yeah.
their environment.
And that's this lovely long-term
Yeah.
work, and at this point in time our staff are at the start of that process. So could you share a sort of brief anecdote maybe of an outcome from one of your other courses that you run, just so our staff can understand the kind of shift we're talking about?
We've done a lot of work in Scandinavia and in Denmark. We're at a stage where an entire organisation has become an ATLASS organisation.
Yeah.
And I was actually there just last week and talking to one of their staff who's been through it, and he's now working with a young man who's from an immigrant family who's got 30 police charges against him, has autism, has a whole range of things. And this staff member, said, ATLASS, looking at his stress has completely changed how I work with this man, because he's getting into a lot of difficult problems. I'm now looking at the stresses in his life, and I'm teaching him coping skills around that. But I'm also looking at how stressed the family are, and I'm teaching them to understand his stress. And he said it has made a significant change in how he interacts with this young man, how he interacts with the family. And a family who were very, very agitated, very distressed. Yeah. And we sometimes want them to change in the same way as we want that person to change. But he's learned particular skills about arousal and stress within a parent. And he's able to apply that to allow that parent to really open up and develop a really meaningful relationship and look at the things that they could possibly change. Because they were either going to say, we don't want him anymore.
Sure.
Or fix him.
Yeah.
And this is someone
neither of which
are absolutely viable options.
Yeah.
And Pierre said that on the course he'd learned the skills to work with that stress. And this was a family who refused to work with social work, had refused to work with health, and Heimdale, who's the organisation that Pierre works for, he was able to get through. He was the only person who was able to do that, and he put that down for using the ATLASS approach.
Well, it sounds really, really interesting, and I know the team at Scottish Autism are absolutely delighted, and as an organisation we're delighted to be working with Studio 3, so thanks very much. We're delighted to work with you too. Thanks very much for sharing that insight. Thanks, Mike.
Thanks, Charlene.